I wanted a place for people to receive authentic guidance and practical ways to awaken. Thought-provoking, paradigm-shifting, and empowering. This is about expanding our human consciousness to create a wave of new possibilities. I'm Dr. Theresa Bullard, and this is Quantum Minds TV. Welcome to Quantum Minds TV, where we take a deep dive into various perspectives on what it's going to take to create a shift in human consciousness. Now, today, I'm honored to have Lynne McTaggart joining me. Lynne is an award-winning author of 7 books, including the international bestsellers, The Power of 8, The Field, The Intention Experiment, and The Bond. She's a highly sought-after public speaker who has spoken on nearly every continent and has also appeared in many documentaries. She's a mentor and change agent who has consistently been voted as one of the world's top 100 spiritual leaders for her groundbreaking work with consciousness and the power of intention. And she's the architect of the Intention Experiments, a web-based global laboratory involving thousands of participants testing the power of group thoughts to heal the world. Lynne's work has made such an impact that she and the Intention Experiments were even prominently featured in the plotline of Dan Brown's blockbuster novel, The Lost Symbol. Lynne is also the co-founder and editor of the world's #1 health magazine, What Doctors Don't Tell You, now published in 15 languages. So Lynne, thank you so much for being my distinguished guest today on Quantum Minds TV, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, and you, Theresa. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So one of the things I'd like to do is I wanted to start off with just a personal story, if that's okay, of how I first came to know about your fantastic work. So in the early 2000s, I was pursuing my PhD in physics. And at the same time, I was also researching for ways to bridge science and consciousness and spirituality. And at first, all the books that I found were more on the subject of like the Tao of Physics, for example. Great book, but there's a lot of philosophically based, trying to bridge mostly Eastern philosophy with quantum physics principles. And as an experimental scientist, I found that most of it was very exciting to me, the possibilities, but I knew that we needed to get more grounded and more evidence-based. And so that was really important to me. So I was searching for that. And your book, The Field, changed all of it. Like yours was the first book that I found. I read it shortly after its release in 2003. And I was so grateful. I was so excited and grateful to see some of the things that you had presented in the field, because I knew it took a lot of work to research, to investigate, to interview all these scientists and the work that they were doing that most people didn't really know about. And you brought it forward in such a way that was really accessible to people. And, the narrative that you brought forward. So I thought it was such a seminal book for me, and still is such a seminal book that it's on my top 10 list. And I highly recommend people read it, and as well as your other fantastic books. So especially for people who want to really understand the power of consciousness and how, it taps in and connects to the quantum field. So it's really an honor to have you on my show. I've followed your work for a really long time, and I'm super looking forward to our conversation.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I now understand the field is taught at a lot of universities, which is thrilling to me because it's indicating an acceptance of some of these ideas that were radical back when these experiments were performed, which is the 70s and 80s. So my book, The Field, is actually a history.
That's
even though it came out.
That is so exciting. It's at the universities too. My gosh.
Yeah. And a lot of people, I've been told over the years that so many different kinds of organizations feel that it is a justifying publication for their work. It gives them a framework like reconnective healing or matrix re-imprinting. They didn't know why what they did worked, but they knew it worked. And so I gave them some sort of framework.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited, and I'm glad it helped you as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so I have a couple of questions that I'd love to dive in just for especially for some of the people who aren't as familiar with your work yet, that are watching this. So one of the things that I was curious about is what is it that really sparked your initial interest in doing the research into the field and interviewing all those scientists and trying to really break it down to be digestible for people?
Sure. Well, remember, I am an investigative reporter by training. I'm a journalist, and I'm used to diving into things very deeply. Back in the 1990s, we were running a publication, and we still are, called What Doctors Don't Tell You. We look at what works and what doesn't work in conventional and alternative medicine. And in the course of doing that, I kept coming across these very good studies of spiritual healing. And it just occurred to me, I said, wait a minute, if you can have a thought, which is what healers basically do, and send it to someone else, and that makes them better, that in itself undermines everything we think about how the world works. So I wanted to find out why this was. Were there such a thing as human energy fields, for instance, which is what I thought I was going to find. So, reporting is a bit like pulling on a ball of string. You start somewhere and you keep pulling. So I started talking to some scientists I knew had been working in consciousness research. And what I discovered, to my astonishment, was not simply some sort of explanation for spiritual healing, but the very beginnings of a completely new science, a new view of the world. So the problem was these scientists, and most scientists talk in code, they talk in math. And also, they don't want to speculate beyond their own experimental findings. And so it soon became apparent to me that not only had I stumbled upon this new science, this new view of the world, but also I was going to have to stitch it all together. I was going to have to synthesize all of this work into a coherent whole. So it was pretty daunting. I wore out a few carpets, pacing the floor, but that resulted in the field. And I guess what most people found was, because I am not a scientist, but used to making things digestible that are scientific, then they found a lot of complex ideas easy to follow.
Well, yeah, you certainly synthesized it into a very compelling narrative. Now, it sounds like you started off because you're really looking at alternative, approaches for our health, and already working with scientists who are studying consciousness. But I've also heard you say in some of your presentations that you kind of started off a little more as a skeptic about some of the New Age claims. And, can you share a little more of your experience of, as you were doing the research into the field, how did that, where did you start from, and how did that shift for you to moving forward with, everything else you did afterwards?
Absolutely. I was open to new scientific theory. That wasn't where I was skeptical. What I was skeptical about was a bit of unfinished business when I finished the field, which was evidence demonstrating that thoughts are an actual something with the capacity to change physical matter. Now, when my book came out shortly after that, there were movies like The Secret, et cetera, and a lot of popularizations of manifestation. And the ideas they were coming across as were essentially, I want, I get. I believe, I receive. Very simplistic ideas about thoughts are things that affect other things. So being the skeptical journalist at heart that I am, I wanted to know how far we could take this. What are we talking about? A little movement of a quantum particle? Or are we talking about curing cancer with our thoughts? So that prompted me to do the next book, which was The Intention Experiment. And the whole idea there was I would not only present all the evidence for the science of intention, but I'd also put it out there as an invitation. Because by that time, I knew lots of scientists working in consciousness research. And I also had a lot of readers because the field was in 30 languages. So I thought, well, hey, I'll just put them together and I'll have one of the biggest global laboratories in the world and I'll test this. So that's what we did. We started out in 2007 with very tiny, very, very subtle effects, like trying to shift the light emissions of a leaf, and moved on to trying to make seeds grow faster and purify water and lower violence in war-torn or violent areas, and even healing someone of post-traumatic stress. And to date, we've run 40 experiments, and 36 have shown measurable, positive, mostly significant effects. And when I say we, I mean I have been working in conjunction with one of a number of prestigious scientists at Princeton or University of California, Penn State, University of Arizona, and so forth, and numerous experimenters and scientists in European universities. So it's been very compelling research, and it's also answered my initial question, how far can we take it? Well, pretty far indeed.
So what would you say then are the most compelling results that you have seen, whether it was looking at the photon emissions from a leaf to plants growing faster to, changing crime stats? Like what's the most shocking or compelling evidence you've seen?
Well, I suppose the most compelling evidence has been lowering violence. It's very difficult if you're focusing on a war-torn area, for instance, and you see a lowering of violence after you do a group intention on that area. It's very hard to say, yeah, this was down to us. There are many, many variables, as you well know, that lower or increase violence. But we've had some that are very well controlled. And one of the ones I'd like to point out was St. Louis, Missouri, which is officially the most violent place in America. And one particular neighborhood, which is called Fairground, is the most violent of all. So this was the end of 2017. We decided to do a big group intention. I invited my audience, and I was broadcasting through Gaia then, to participate in this giant experiment. And we focused on Fairground for 10 minutes a day for 6 days. And afterward, I worked with a noted professor of statistics at the University of California called Dr. Jessica Utz, who is a very well-known consciousness researcher and statistician, to work on the statistics. We looked at violent statistics, that's violent crime versus property crime, for 3 years before and then 6 months after our experiment. And it was really fascinating because everywhere else in St. Louis, Missouri, continued on its upward trajectory of violent crime and property crime. For Fairground, the trajectory had been going up, but the property crime continued to go up, but violent crime, the focus of our intention, dropped by 43%.
Wow.
And when we compared it to neighborhoods around there, all police statistics, by the way, when we compared it to all of the neighborhoods around, everything else, everywhere else, continued on its upward climb, except our little neighborhood. So that was pretty compelling. But there have been many, many things about the intention experiments that have been very compelling, and not just the outcomes.
And when you look at those crime stats, so first of all, the people were everywhere, right? They weren't locally like getting together for an intention meditation kind of thing. They were coming from all over the place and just remotely sending their intention. And so that, right there shows that it really is the morphic field kind of idea, or this non-local field, tapping into that quantum field, versus it being just about like group meditation in the area that creates some coherence for it, like the Maharishi effect, for example.
Oh,
But
yeah. This is it. Our people have never been, well, sometimes I've done experiments where I have people in a room,
Mhm.
but the target isn't right there.
Mm.
Um, but most of the time, I have people dotted all over the planet who are only coming together and holding this intention by viewing it on their computer screen or their phone.
Okay.
So people are coming from, and we've had people from 70, 80 countries around and almost every continent on the planet
Mhm.
participating. And yes, that indicates to me, I like to call it a psychic internet, because suddenly our all of our individual intentions come together because we're holding one single thought all at the same time.
Mhm.
And that's the difference between, say, intention experiments and the Maharishi effect. Maharishi effect, and they've done many good studies about it, the TM organization, Transcendental Meditation Organization. But theirs was a group of meditators, not meditating on anything in particular, just meditating. And they found, doing studies in 48 different cities, that when a critical mass of meditators did that, the crime rate went down. Now, with intention experiments, as I say, our people were dotted all over the place. And also, we weren't in the vicinity of our target. Now, one of the really fascinating studies that I found was one we did early on with the University of Arizona with seeds. So what we did was their consciousness laboratory. They have a whole lab for consciousness research, working with Dr. Gary Schwartz, a noted psychologist. They put together 4 sets of 30 seeds each, labeled them A, B, C, D. I was speaking at an event in Sydney, Australia, in front of an audience of about 800. So I asked them to participate. They chose which seeds we sent intention to. Let's say it's seeds A. We didn't tell the scientists which seeds we were focusing on. We sent intention to that one set of seeds. We told the scientists we were done. That was their cue to plant all 4 sets of seeds. And again, we didn't unblind the study. And finally, when they measured them 5 days later, and they said they were done, we said, okay, it was seeds A, or whichever one it was. And remember, I only showed photos of the seeds in front of my audience, not the seeds themselves. Those seeds were back in Tucson, Arizona. The seeds sent intention grew significantly higher than the controls. So let's just unpack this a moment. First of all, the seeds were in Tucson. We were in Sydney, Australia, 8,000 miles away. Plus, my audience is just sending intention to a photo of the seeds, essentially a symbolic representation of the seeds. Yet we were having an effect. So this, to me, is an extraordinary demonstration of non-locality. And of course, 3 scientists just received the Nobel Prize for their work in non-locality. A few of them, people who have worked on this for years. But this is a perfect demonstration of it. When we are thinking a similar thought, we have a power, as we do individually, but I believe it gets magnified in a group circumstance. And we can affect seeds on the other side of the world.
Well, and I think it's interesting that you mentioned for both these experiments that you had them focusing on a picture or, a video feed or something like that of either the location that everyone was sending to or the seeds, and which particular seeds. And, so through the picture, it gave them a way to focus or even visualize what they were sending the intention to. How much do you feel that having that clarity of who or what, the image is that you're sending to is versus just kind of leaving them to imagine it for themselves?
No, I think it's very important to have an actual image and a location. So more recently, we've done even weirder experiments. And by the way, with the seed experiment, we ran it 5 more times in different locations. And one of those times was also among my audience all over the world, just doing it via my website on the internet. And every single time the seeds sent intention grew higher than the controls. Interestingly enough, it didn't matter the size of the audience, whether we had thousands participating in our intention over the internet. We only had 100 at a particular workshop, a little retreat in Rhinebeck, New York. Nevertheless, we had the same result. So size of group doesn't matter. What matters, though, is a group and a common intention. But as I was saying, one of the weirdest things we've been doing, we did this during lockdown. We had focuses of intention for various things. For instance, with the 2020 inauguration, after all of the events of January 6th, we had a focus on lowering violence and maintaining peace in the Capitol when President Biden was inaugurated. So we did that intention. And while they were doing that, I also had the audience not only look at a photo of, Capitol Hill and where the inauguration was going to take place, but also focus on some equipment in St. Petersburg, Russia. And for this, I worked with a scientist called Dr. Konstantin Korotkov, a noted Russian physicist who has also looked at bio-photon emissions, the light emissions coming out of living things, and devised a way to measure them. And there are several ways to measure them. He has one way. And what we found, he has special equipment that measures essentially the capacitance of the room, the electrical charge in the room. And it's normally very subtle and very easily changed by emotion. And he found, and we did this in 4 different circumstances, that the equipment would change incredibly just during the times of intention. Now, I never told him when we were holding the actual 10-minute intention, but our intention always mirrored what was going on with the equipment. And so different intentions, we had the same thing. So once again, having a spot of focus, an area of focus is very important with intention.
There's so many things I want to ask you out of what you just discussed. We'll come back to the light emissions, that Dr. Korotkov and that you've even talked about from Fritz Albert Popp work as well with biophotons, because that, to me, that was one of the biggest new revelations in my own reading of the field. Like, I had never been exposed to that before, and it was really interesting because I even went around in my university. I was at the University of Washington at the time and trying to see, like, is there any possibility that I could change my dissertation research to investigating biophotons? Because that would be like amazing. But even the scientists in biophysics and whatnot, they hadn't heard of it. They had heard of maybe bioluminescence, but they hadn't heard of biophotons. So your book introduced me to that concept, and I have loved it ever since, because the idea that hopefully, not just the cells, but the DNA itself is communicating via light was pretty mind-blowing to me. But it makes a lot of sense as well when we can achieve a coherent state of being and communicate with maybe a metaphysical light, as well as our intention and consciousness can, I think, connect to that biophoton field and communicate to our own DNA. And so I think that some of this work that Korotkov and Popp have done and others, it's becoming more widespread now, though, if I recall. It's just, I don't know, have you met any researchers in America who are doing any biophoton research at this point?
Oh, yeah. There are numerous scientists. University of Arizona has equipment there for measuring biophoton emissions. They got hold of a light tight, essentially like a telescope, that measured very faint light in outer space and could literally count photon by photon. So they manipulated this equipment and then ended up getting their own to measure bio-photon emissions coming out of living things. So first they started doing plants, and they not only were able to count photon by photon, but also photograph it, which was one of the first. And so then what they went on to do was to photograph the light coming out of the hands of healers when they were sending healing intention. And that to me indicated that light plays an important role in intention, because when the healers so-called ran energy, when they sent healing intention, the light coming out of their dominant hand vastly increased. Is fascinating.
Wow.
So yes, there is this living light. And as you say, it provides us with a mechanism for how lots of things work, because they found not only was it coming out of DNA, but it was global. It was a global communications medium, so that if you put medicine on one hand, the light will change from that spot, but it'll also change globally very quickly. So clearly the light is speaking back and forth.
Wow. Well, so just for the audience here, for those who are not familiar with biophotons, it's been measured that the DNA and living DNA and biology will emit light, coherent light, meaning it's laser-like. It's all in the same frequency and phase and so forth, like a laser, but it's very, very weak. So it's extremely weak, coherent light, but it's in the visible light spectrum. Meaning if we were sensitive enough and tuned in enough, we actually could see it with our own eyes, which might be what some people who are supposed to be clairvoyant, who see energy fields, maybe they are seeing these biophotons. And then the hypothesis is that the DNA is using this coherent light, this biophoton energy, to communicate across all of the network of DNA at the speed of light. It's like an information superhighway that operates at the speed of light, and then can communicate. So we can also modulate information into the light. And through this, I know that Dr. Garyev has also done some studies, is another Russian scientist who's also done some studies of modulating words and different frequencies into laser light, which then has been, kind of shown upon the DNA, and then the DNA has responded to that. So there's a whole field of research here that are scientists who are studying the DNA some of them still aren't hip to this yet, because they're still so much focused on the genes and maybe even the epigenetic layers, but they're starting to tap into this whole other mechanism, layers and layers above all of this, that controls the communication flow through the DNA, which is with the biophoton field. So it's what you're showing here or explaining here seems to really be showing that the intention, the mind, and the focus of the healer is able to then amplify that flow of those biophotons. And in ancient traditions, we might have called it healing energy. We might have called it chi or prana, this energy that we can generate within our own body and send to others. But that coherence of it seems to really be a part of what's necessary to bring order and organization, which then allows for greater levels of healing as well. So there's got to be this fascinating connection between our intentions and the light, the physical light and the biophotons that we can flow.
Absolutely. And here's a weird thought. Well, first of all, I think people should understand too that not only is it a communication system within the body, but also it is a conversation that happens between us and other living things. One of the things that Fritz Popp discovered was that light gets sent out synchronicitously. So when we send out our light, we're all sending out a tiny current of light out there all the time. So if you were sitting a yard in front of me, we'd be having this conversation, but we'd also be having a conversation of light going back and forth. And so Pop discovered that all living things are having this little conversation of light. But here's another thought. Some scientists believe that microtubules, which are hollow tubes that are essentially like the scaffolding of a cell, are what they've called light pipes, a vehicle for this light to get transmitted through the body. If so, if you look at the image of a cell, it's absolutely drenched in microtubules. There's huge networks. You know, you see the big blob of the nucleus in a big, amplified picture of a cell, but you also see an incredible complex network of microtubules. So I always think about this and think, oh my goodness, if we're having a negative thought, we are drenching our cells in this kind of information via these light emissions. If microtubules indeed are the tracks for this light, if they are light pipes. But as you say, Theresa, the whole idea of coherence is increase. So think of the light bulbs. A light bulb has what they call constructive and destructive interference with the light emissions. Destructive and constructive go like this. So some cancel each other out. But if it's all coherent, they're all waving at the same time, which increases the signal so much that you're talking about a light bulb suddenly becoming like the light of the sun, essentially. Well, like a laser light.
Yeah, laser or even LED, right? You can think of the brightness of a single LED versus an incandescent light bulb. And that intensity that comes out of those LEDs is because they are very specific frequencies coming out of the light versus more of a broader spectrum of the light.
Pop discovered that this light coming out of us is among the most coherent in nature. Call it organized, brighter. It's highly focused light. And so when we think about our bodies being a mechanism for this and also a transmission for this, that is, extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, I love what that you brought microtubules into it, because microtubules remind me of fiber optic cables, and we send our Wi-Fi signals or our, broadband or whatnot, through fiber optic cables. We send light through fiber optic cables. And so it's a very highly efficient way of guiding the light over longer distances, for example. And I know that like some of the work by Stuart Hamerhoff and whatnot, who are researching these microtubules, they also believe that quantum, effects come in there, that they can be a way of mediating a quantum physics interaction with consciousness. But near the light is being generated though by the DNA, and it's the non-coding sections of the DNA that are more likely in charge of generating this transmission of these biophotons and this coherent light. And that non-coding section of the DNA, scientists still, they're so focused on the coding sections that they still hardly understand what's going on with these non-coding sections. And at one point in time, they called it junk DNA because they said, oh, it's just left over from evolution and it's not needed anymore. But now they're realizing, oh no, there's higher layers of coding and instructions that are happening in these quote unquote non-coding or non-gene parts of the DNA.
Absolutely. I mean, scientists oftentimes do that. If they don't understand it, they label it junk or dark matter or something like that. And thankfully, we're now finding out that junk DNA is hardly that at all.
Right. Evolution would have gotten rid of it a long time ago if it wasn't needed. Join us again as we continue to dive deeper into this enlightening conversation with Lynne McTaggart on the next episode of Quantum Minds TV.
This conscious conversation was created, produced, and recorded by Dr. Theresa Bullard and edited by Verse Content and Depth Perception Films. The theme music and intro videography were created by Tim Mountain and Even Mode Productions. Quantum Minds TV is a product of the Quantum Learning Academy.